The first thing I wanted to talk about is this interaction with the Chinese ambassador to the United States. So, recently, there's been a lot of reports about China possibly supporting the Russian invasion. Now, when I say that, I want to be clear. I'm not talking about Chinese troops in Europe. I'm not talking about, like, China invading, like, Ukraine or anything like that. But specifically, there was a U.S. cable suggesting that the Chinese were going to send MREs, basically like food, to Russia for the troops. And there's been a lot of speculation. Now, the Chinese and Russians deny this, of course, but there's been a lot of speculation on what China is going to be doing when it comes to the invasion of Ukraine. What's their stance? What are they doing? And China's basically consistently said basically one thing, and that is like, we want to see an end to the violence, and we are against the violence. That's basically it. Like, people shouldn't die. And they've sent a little bit of aid, like humanitarian aid to the Ukrainians. That's basically it. But with all this speculation, with Russia being so isolated from international markets right now, the ruble losing all of its value, people are talking about a Russian default, even though I'm not an economist. I can't tell you if that's likely or not, really. But I think, look, companies are pulling out. Russia's got an economy problem. SWIFT is not looking good. No fuckers, the Russian YouTubers left the country. That's when you really know it's all hit the fan. So they're desperate. And so the idea that they would go to the Chinese for possible assistance when it comes to either A, the invasion, or B, something else when it comes to this conflict is not that crazy. And so this ambassador attempts to solicit a condemnation from the Chinese ambassador to the United States on the issue of the Russian invasion of Ukraine in this interview on Face the Nation. So I wanted to play this because this interaction is super interesting.
And we are in the opinion.
Russia amassed more than 150,000 troops at China's border?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why we want
just to be clear,
to have a
China,
friendly, good neighborly relations with Russia.
But you would recognize it's not good, friendly, neighborly relations to put 150,000 troops on the border of a neighboring country and then to send those troops into that country.
Well,
in those circumstances, why can't you condemn this as an invasion?
Mm-hmm. Well, don't be naive. Condemnation.
To be clear, the Chinese haven't really even called it an invasion, if I'm being clear, which is you're just jerking people around when you don't call it an invasion. But that was in February. They might have called it since then. But if I remember correctly, they still haven't. But basically, people have been trying to get a condemnation out of the Chinese government for a few days now.
Condemnation.
It sounds naive to say that's not an invasion.
It doesn't solve the problem. I would be surprised if Russia will back down by condemnation. What is urgently
will they back
needed
down if your president asks Vladimir Putin to back down? Will your president ask Vladimir Putin to back down?
We have done so.
They rely
and we will
on
continue to promote peace talks and urge immediate fire. And condemnation only doesn't help. We need wisdom. We need wisdom. We need courage. And we need good diplomacy.
Well, Vladimir Zelensky says he would like to meet with Vladimir Putin.
Mm-hmm.
Vladimir Zelensky's in a bunker.
Mm-hmm.
Vladimir Putin is at a political pro-war rally right now.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have
okay, this is nitpicky, but I do want to bring it up. Technically, it was a pro-annexation of Crimea celebration event. But it was largely used as well to support the war.
Diplomacy when it is one country, the only one country willing to actually negotiate.
Mm-hmm. China has good relations with Russia, has good relations with Ukraine, and China keeps close communications with the United States and with Europe.
Mm-hmm.
They enable China to reach.
You want to know how I know he's doing his best to avoid the question, not answer, and like keep good relations and just try to keep everyone at an arm's distance and not necessarily even say his actual opinion or be truthful about the matter? I'm a panel host. I've hosted a lot of panels in my day. This is how I talk when a big panel's coming up and somebody asks me about 2 separate panel guests. Like, so I hear Destiny and Vosh are going to be on the same panel together. What do you think about the recent disagreement they have? Look, I have good relations with both. Sometimes I agree with Vosh, sometimes I agree with Destiny. You know, I think they've both added to the space in a lot of ways. They're pillars of the community. And, you know, when it comes to this issue, I think everybody just needs to calm down and try to, you know, act civilly. I'm happy to be a liaison in any communications between the 2 parties. Like I do the same thing, because I'm a businessman. Okay, it's the same thing.
To all parties' concerns in the crisis. So China's unique role, you know, can help the peaceful settlement.
Tell me that.
Okay. So if anybody has the rest of this interview, I would love it. I couldn't find it. So if anybody has a link to this, I'd appreciate it. But there's 2 things I want to talk about here, because there seems to be 2 statements here that the Chinese ambassador to the United States tries to make. I don't want to obfuscate and like remove from his point. The first point he makes is that condemning the situation doesn't fix anything. Now I could talk about how a condemnation could further pressure Vladimir Putin and or make the Russian public maybe reassess what's going on. It can rally attention towards the issue. With more attention and more magnifying glasses on the issue, it brings more attention to it. A condemnation on its own, I will say, it doesn't change the physical reality of the war that much, but it would also solidly put, and this is the most important part of it, solidly put China in a position where they would be basically expressing blatant hypocrisy if they were to condemn the invasion and then support it. It would be difficult for them to condemn an invasion and then support it with MREs or support. And that's why people are trying to get a condemnation out of them. Because if they can get a condemnation, it would be more difficult moving forward for the Chinese to actually support the Russian invasion. But that's what I think is really going on. But let's address the point he's trying to make. Condemning these types of things don't fix anything. That's interesting. Here's the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Fucking 3 days ago, condemning the United States for providing arms to Ukraine.
China has delivered aid supplies to Ukraine, such as food, quilts, and sleeping bags. The United States has been sending deadly weapons. On March 16th, US announced an additional $800 million in military support for Ukraine. That brings the total amount of US military assistance to Ukraine to more than $1 billion. Will this bring stability and security, or will it cause more casualties? What do the civilians in Ukraine need more, food or guns? Any rational person with common sense will find it easy to answer this question.
Okay, so this statement condemning, because that's what this is, a condemnation of the United States sending weapons. So the Chinese can't muster up the spirit at the United Nations to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Can't condemn it on the Security Council either, would rather abstain, remove itself from the situation. Can't muster the courage to do that. Won't come out and condemn this. And the Russians have mowed down grandmothers and grandfathers taking midday drives in Ukraine near hospitals. They've bombed, according to certain sources in Ukraine, over 60 hospitals, 30 schools, and kindergartens, man. Kindergartens. I'd have to actually go back to the source to try to find the exact numbers, but that's the numbers we're working with. We're talking about thousands dead in Mariupol. We're talking about civilian infrastructure targeted. We're talking about the beginning of Grozny 2.0. As the Russians just enact just blatant chauvinism on the Ukrainian state, where civilians are dying left and right. They're firing on humanitarian corridors. They're mining the paths of humanitarian corridors. It's absolutely disgusting. No condemnation. Zero condemnation. But once the Americans say, okay, this is too far, we're going to now send guns to the Ukrainians so they can beat back the people who are slaughtering, the Ukrainians. Because whether you like it or not, The time for pacifism in Ukraine is over. Until a peace deal is agreed upon, right now, the best thing Ukraine needs is leverage and fighting power to show itself to the Russians that you want to drag this out, we're going to make it long, we're going to make it painful, you better come to the table and get the fuck out of our country, right? That should be what we should be doing as the United States. Point blank, period. Right? And instead of condemning the country that invaded Ukraine, that is doing war crime after war crime, bombing civilians and bombing civilians, causing the vast amount of the casualties that we're seeing from the conflict, we're seeing from the Russian side in Mariupol, Kharkiv, Kiev, Sumy, Cherniv, Odessa. These locations that are getting these locations that are getting bombed by the Russians, killing Russian civilians, Ukrainian civilians, children. Instead of condemning that, the Chinese Ministry for Foreign Affairs condemns the United States for giving Ukraine the weapons it needs to defend itself. Ukraine is on the floor getting stabbed by the Russian Federation, and we have the audacity to give them a knife so they can defend themselves. And that deserves a commendation. But not the Russian Federation stabbing Ukraine, no. That doesn't deserve a condemnation. And according to the Chinese ambassador to the United States, condemnations solve nothing. So why condemn this then? And not the other actions? This is just hypocrisy. This is hypocrisy from the Chinese state. Also, let's talk about this framing from the Minister of Foreign Affairs. The real issue here is you're sending weapons. It's just making the conflict worse. Oh golly gee. The real good person would just be sending aid of a humanitarian nature. So many of you might not know this, but I have an issue that means a lot to me is the conflict in Myanmar right now between the rebels and the government. Basically, 1 year ago in February, so over a year ago now, a military junta overthrew the democratically elected government of Aung San Suu Kyi and then proceeded to arrest people, shoot protesters, mow them down, continue to target villages. And this is the same military that also genocided Rohingya Muslims. The Chinese government is supplying the military with the guns, ammo, and weapons to do said violence. If the Chinese state's position on this was consistent, we would see them say we will no longer sell weapons to this illegal overthrow of the government that was unconstitutional under Myanmar's law. We will not sell them weapons. Or even if you didn't agree with that, you're just like, we will not give them weapons because we don't want to give them tools to kill more civilians because our biggest concern is civilians. But that wasn't the case. In fact, really, one of the only times the Chinese government spoke out against what was going on in Myanmar was once a Chinese factory burnt down. It wasn't when all the protesters were shot. It wasn't during the Rohingya genocide. Actually, China was a little bit in Myanmar's corner during that, because China has a great history of how it treats its Muslims. It wasn't any of these things. They didn't speak out against any of that. It was once a Chinese factory burnt down. The Chinese state's position on this is incredibly hypocritical. Unbelievably hypocritical, in fact. My God. What was the other thing he said? It was, a condemnation fixes nothing. What was the other thing he said?
We need courage and we need good diplomacy.
Well, Vladimir Zelensky says he would like to meet with Vladimir Putin. Mm-hmm. Vladimir Zelensky's in a bunker. Mm-hmm. Vladimir Putin is at a political pro-war rally right now. Mm-hmm. You can't have diplomacy when it is one country, the only one country willing to actually negotiate. Mm-hmm.
China has good relations with Russia, has good relations with Ukraine.
Okay, so to be clear, The stated position here, as would be my stated position with my panel moderation, is I'm not going to give public statements in this way or that way because I care about who I can get on my show. In this instance, he's saying I'm not going to say one way or the other way because I care about our relationship with the Russian Federation. And if U.S. intelligence is correct, which, of course, big question mark on that, they could also still want to keep open avenues to possibly support the Russian Federation. And if they openly condemned it, that would close those avenues. Now, I'll say that explains the rationale behind the statement, but it doesn't necessarily justify the statement. Because what that would mean is you're saying we're not going to call it an invasion, we're not going to condemn the invasion, even though we're against all the suffering, we're going to send all the aid, because we want to keep a good relationship with Russia. So therefore, you're saying, I will deny reality as it is currently so I can keep good relations with this other country. It would not be the first time this has happened in history, but certainly is a justification. Anyway, very strange interaction between the Chinese ambassador to the United States and CBS. Most certainly. I will say, though, I do appreciate the Chinese ambassador doing interviews on the issue on American television. Definitely since it was such a hostile interview. Hey, this is one of my Taiwanese fans. Huh.